Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture. Today's episode, Merry Humbug. So we've got a bit of a different episode. It's a bonus episode, and it's a Christmas episode, and it's a solo episode. We'll have a regular episode coming out for you on Monday, pretty much immediately post-Christmas. Before I get started, obviously, Amy sends all of her warmest holiday greetings to you. I wasn't quite sure if I would have time to do a bonus episode at all, and so we didn't put together a transatlantic talk time, but her heart is going out to you as well, and if we could have, we would have, but here we are. I got into a cool conversation with Dustin, who is the host of Sandman Stories Presents. It's a folklore podcast, and he's a huge booster of other indie pods on Twitter, so I wanted to give him a little shout out. He was asking about the origin of the word humbug and whether we had actually looked into that or not. And we hadn't, and so I did. And I figured it's fairly seasonal, thanks to Charles Dickens. We'll get into that. So I wanted to get it out before Christmas. By then, I mean probably on Christmas for most people listening. But here we go. So humbug, obviously, or at least I think obviously, the first thing anyone thinks of is probably Ebenezer Scrooge from Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol. Or if you're supremely highbrow like myself, The Muppet Christmas Carol. But that's kind of, I think, where it's got its strongest association. And a lot of people, Dickens was quite the neologist, dude who makes up words. And so a lot of people, I think, were under the impression, I think I certainly was, that he had just invented it as a thing for Scrooge to say to get across that he was generally grumpy and miserable. But by the time Christmas Carol came out in 1843, this was a word that had been around for probably more than a century, actually, which is impressive for a slang word. The earliest printed example of humbug comes from 1750 from a publication called The Student, or the Oxford and Cambridge Monthly Miscellany. It's a neat little magazine, and of course I found it online, and I will be posting, I like words, an excerpt from it where this author talks about the word humbug. And it's interesting because this is a really, really good example of why it's important not to conflate the first printed use with the first use, because this is an author specifically kind of deriding the way humbug is used. And so clearly it's actually gone probably through two different sort of sets of people using it before anyone bothered to write it down. Anyway, so what the author says, there is a word very much in vogue with the people of taste and fashion, which, though it has not even the penumbra of a meaning, yet makes up the sum total of the wit, sense, and judgment of the aforesaid people of taste and fashion. This word is humbug. And it's a cool little blurb in this magazine from, again, 270 years ago. And it's obviously, and to the surprise of nobody, there's a lot of references in there that I don't get because I'm an ocean and several centuries removed from it. But it seems to be that what the author is kind of talking about is that and this is all just my supposition here based on this one article from 1750, but just hear me out. It's Christmas. The way he talks about this word and its usage, and I'll get to it in a second, he's sort of setting up a differentiation between the professors and the masters and the pastors at Oxford and Cambridge and everyone else, himself included. And I get the sense that part of what he's doing is kind of mocking the older crowd for using, for pulling one of those, "How do you do, fellow kids?" moments with the word, because it feels like he thinks that they assume it means something, and he knows that it doesn't. It's just a nonsense word that those kids today were making up. At one point he talks about how the natives, which I take to mean the student population at Oxford and Cambridge, and how they speak English, but none of the professors are professors of English, because they all speak Latin and Greek and French. And it's this interesting little sidebar commentary on kind of the linguistic divides at Oxford and Cambridge in the middle of the 18th century. But what he says is, upon the presumption, therefore, of having a little smattering of English from the advantage of a liberal education, I will venture to affirm that this humbug is neither an English word nor a derivative from any other language. It is indeed a blackguard sound, made use of by most people of distinction. It is a fine make-weight in conversation, and some great men deceive themselves so egregiously as to think they mean something by it. So it seems like he's just kind of mocking them, like, look at these guys, they're pretending to be so high and mighty and grabbing this expression that they don't even know that it's just a meaningless thing. But the bigger thing is that obviously means that it was in use probably for quite some time by the time this person was writing in this periodical in 1750. And it was still obviously around 100 years later, because Dickens saw fit to put it in the mouth of Scrooge. And I'm wondering if that sense of the old fuddy-duddy, the out-of-touch grump using this word, even though he doesn't really know what it means or whatever, like, I'm not sure if that sense would have still been around for Dickens to be using, to use the word to make a specific comment on Scrooge. But it's interesting that it was still around, and it's even more interesting that because Dickens just decided to grab this nonsense word that nobody knows where it came from, and put it into Scrooge, into the character of Scrooge, that it became so entangled that it's just completely immortal now, and oddly associated with Christmas specifically. It's a seasonal word that shouldn't be, but the power of Dickens. The OED makes a good summary point about this, and it talks about how this is applicable to other words as well. The OED says, many guesses at the possible derivation of humbug have been made, but as with other and more recent words of similar introduction, the facts as to its origin appear to have been lost even before the word became common enough to excite attention. Which makes sense, because if a slang word kind of comes about, by the time it's, quote, common enough to excite attention, the exact origins, especially back then when there wasn't a written record of every communication, would have been tougher to track. So by the time anyone notices, hey, this is this word, then nobody really knows how it got there, if it was just something that a bunch of kids made up one night and, thought it sounded good. Or grumpy, and used it for that reason too. While I was originally just going to do humbug, and then I thought, well, why not look up another word that's associated with Christmas, just to see if there's a story there. And there is kind of an interesting story behind the word merry, M-E-R-R-Y. This one's really interesting. I'm not sure if this is going to make any sense, but I'll try it out on you, because you're already listening to me. And it might be the only word that I've seen where the etymology is also kind of a proverb and a reflection on the nature of the word itself. Anyway, the proverb here that I'm thinking of is time flies when you're having fun. And yeah, we'll get into it. So the early examples of this word, it's very, very old. It is Germanic in origin. We're talking King Aelfred's time, the last century of the first millennium. And it originally didn't refer to people. It just wasn't something you referred to a person with or a group of people, but it was things, more specifically in the very, very earliest uses, again, in writing, activities. And the first sort of group of definitions in the OED lists the variants under the heading of gives pleasure. So they've got pleasant activities, agreeable, nice to listen to music, soothing, pastoral, beautiful scenery, like scenic places, great places to be, that kind of thing. And all a bunch of variations of that. So that shows that the actual nature of it hasn't really changed all that much. We still think of, if you're having a merry time, you wouldn't necessarily use it in terms of a place. And music, if you heard merry music, it wouldn't just be nice to listen to. I feel like it's got a bubbliness about it. And some people can have, some music is perfectly enjoyable without being bubbly. Some music is perfectly enjoyable because it's not bubbly. But that said, it doesn't seem to have changed that much over the last 1,000 years. What's interesting is what happened to it to get there while it was still in the Germanic ancestry section of the English family tree. So it comes from a Germanic root that also gives us the word mirth. And that has its own roots in Old High German, Murg, I don't know, M-U-R-G. And Murg just means short. And so what we actually get is something is merry because it makes the time seem short. So time flies when you're having fun. Time tends to go super quick while you're doing something enjoyable. And that's the sort of sense of why merry things are called merry, because they make the time go by quickly. It gets traced back to a Pi root that I am not going to try to pronounce. It is spelled M-R-E-G-H-U. I'm not sure what the hyphen means. I should look that up, but I haven't. And I probably won't, to be honest, but I should. But this Pi root just means short again. Now this Pi root has an interesting set of branches that go off from it. It kept the M sound in the Germanic line, and you get that mirth and you get merry. In Greek, it was a B, and it gives us the root for arm, where you get like brak. So all those BRAC words that are related to arm, embrace, bracelet, pretzel, weirdly enough. And this comes from the idea of the brachus, or that chunk of the arm was the shorter of the two sections of the arm. It was specifically for the upper arm, so shorter than the longer forearm, and that's where that short to arm thing comes in, and eventually it became the whole arm, I guess. In Latin, it also got the B, which may or may not have because it went through Greek first, but this is where we get Latin-rooted English words like brevity, brief, abridge, or abbreviate. Those all come from the same root, meaning short, because it's shortened. So I really liked this one and thought it was very cool, just because of that really neat kind of, the word just means short because time flies when you're having fun. Now, Smith, I went to Synonyms Discriminated for this one, just, again, to see what was there. And interestingly, he puts it in with cheerful and mirth and merry and sprightliness and a bunch of other words. But he seems to echo the origin in the sense of short. But it's not clear that he's doing it with an eye on the actual etymology of the word or its ancestry. He sort of interprets something merry as being necessarily fleeting. So what he says is, merry points to an occasional and transient elevation of spirits. Mirth, which is the cognate noun to merry, is less tranquil than cheerfulness. It requires the companionship of others to feed upon. Social excitement and the noise of jests and laughter are needed for mirth. So, he's got that sort of transient, short-lived sense to merry, but I'm not sure if he knows that connection. I don't know. And so I also thought that was a fitting way to close this short little bonus Christmas mini-sode, because, as I don't need to tell anyone, it is a weird/garbage year. And so a lot of people's Christmas plans have been scuppered by the year of the plague apocalypse. And so I have a feeling that for most of us, this Christmas will involve a lot less mirth in the Smith's jests and sounds of ringing laughter and cacophonous socializing than it normally would in other years. But hopefully your Christmas holidays are short in all the best ways and for all the best reasons, because you are having a very Merry Christmas, or a very Merry whatever else you're celebrating this time of year. And so that is Merry and Humbug. Try to pull a kind of yin and yang, push and pull type of thing for this little Christmas bonus. But I hope you all have a fantastic holiday. And here's hoping that we can safely and socially distancedly ring in 2021 to the effect of it being a much brighter year in all of our futures. And I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye. And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard in this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at Lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.